We are going to present here the shape room, i.e. the part of the Shaper Wave Dynamics software, which is dedicated to the creation of the board. We're just going to present the interface. So on the left here we have the project menu and the project tree, in which we see the different elements of the project. In a project there is the wave, the surfer and his board. Still in the left panel we go to the library. There we will see a series of objects that we will be able to drag into the project to build our project. We have especially in the library, which can therefore be of interest, the library of boards, that we will be able to drag into the project and select to be able to work on it. This is our board library here. In this library we have the modules that make up the board. We will talk about them later, the outline, the custom tails, the series of sections, the series of rails and the pairs of rockers. We also have sets of fins, images of boards which can be placed on the board, and bathymetries which relate more to waves. So that's it for the left panel, and we'll move on to the Shape Room tab. It's a 3D area here in which we can select the objects of our board. We have in the background objects that are selectable on hover. These objects will generally bring us back to key elements. If we double-click here, we will go to the outline. So at the bottom we see the outline parameters. Here it is section parameters, section measurement. If I double-click I'll open the section tool, which we'll see later. Here it's the clean shape. It's a way to align all the sections together to harmonize the shape of the board. Here by double-clicking we enter the fin interface, and at the top our rocker tool. Double-clicking opens the rocker generation and control tool. You can also find all these tools simply by going to the tabs and selecting them manually. Here we have a small radio. It's an accessory, it's just radio streams to play some music. Here there is the light settings. If double-click on it, I will open the light settings interface. So in our shape room, we can select the way to light in order to highlight certain things. For example here if I select bottom up, I'm going to remove the fins. And we're going to do some lighting. No, I'm going to remove the main light. We're going to do grazing lighting on the right and on the left. We could decide to light one side or the other of the board, and adjust the level of grazing light to see, as we do in the shape room, to highlight the bottom shapes. So we light from above. We can add a spot here. A simple light, in general, is enough. So here is the light adjustment tab. Here there is a button called Reset 3D, use it when your computer loses the 3D display. So in this case you do Reset 3D, and you recover your display. Here we can therefore switch to full screen on the shape room. So that we only have a shape room interface in front of the eyes. But hey, we're often working on different elements, so access to the embedded interface is still quite practical, unless we have several screens on our computer. So we are going to go back to Inlaid. In the menu here we will display statistics at the top, which are for example the thicknesses, when we have selected points on the board, or different information, the distance from the center. We can display, or not, this information there. The views menu to switch from one view to another. You can minimize a view and apply it. You can change the view perspective. You can switch to isometric, fishy, normal perspective remaining the most common view menu. Here we have the tools. By default we are in rotation. That is to say that when we move the mouse in the screen, we turn the screen and we start to rotate around a point. On this subject, when you select a point on the board and double-click on it, that's important, you refocus the screen around this point, so we can turn around, and it really allows us to navigate the board like that. By double-clicking on a place that interests us, we refocus it and we can zoom around and come and see precise details. So double-click to position yourself at a place on the board that interests us. Here it is a lateral movement, which can be useful in certain cases. But really, we use it very rarely because we just have to double-click on the place that interests us. The zoom to really zoom in very close on an area. Usually the wheel is enough. Here it makes screenshots. You can make screenshots of the image you have in front of you. It's just an element to show or hide the fins. So the music here. There we have a small measurement tool. If we select a point with a right click, and with a left click, we have information, which is displayed. If we select the information here, we will see the distances between the points, and other information which are displayed at the point level. Here it's the objects of the shape room, so we can see them, or not see them. Like here for example. We'll put it back. There it is, simply the position in which we see the board. Here we are going to put it in top up, bottom up. There we are going to select the way in which we put the board on shape stand. Here we have a little nod to levitation board support. In fact, we can put the board in rotation at a certain speed vertically to observe it. Look at details on it like that, without doing anything, watching it turn 3 speeds. And therefore a small invitation to see our friends from levitation board support. So here we are going to uncheck the board support and switch to something normal top bottom. Here stand level, good, go hop, we put it. After that it's light, so here we activate or deactivate the lights. Well, here we are a little in the dark, so we will turn on either side light. To make grazing light we saw earlier, or the 2 grazing lights. They're the spot. There we will put everything. So personally I like it better when there is only light on it. A very important point is this, it is this dynamic on-off option. So dynamic on-off, it will be the subject of specific tutorials. Here we go into the hydrodynamics of the board and into the tools for calculating the hydrodynamic performance of the board. We are going to go to the right pane, length volume. Here we can very quickly vary the length of our board. By selecting a length, there I put 2m, apply, and so there we have our outline adjusted at 2m. And there we can also modify its volume, so you can change the volume as you want, and very quickly without having to edit anything else. That's quite interesting, when you're trying the board in the wave room. Well, with a certain surface weight, you'll see that by inflating the board a little, and that by putting a little more volume, or a little more length, it does not necessarily have the same reaction to the takeoff. And we will realize that a large board starts much better than a small board. Surf community, and files sharing, that is to say that if we have a board that we want to share, simply put it on the community, we will be able to share it here. So we will see the tutorial on community surfing later. At the top right, so there are the alerts, if there is a problem, a message or a warning, etc. This is where it will be displayed. When there are too many, we clear everything. It's there, the way the software can communicate with you through different messages. So there is the CNC, which is quite interesting. In fact, we have incorporated a code creation module. That is to say, machine code for CNC. It is quite complex. We will see in detail in a tutorial specially dedicated to codes. But for information, here we will be able, for example, to generate machine codes for rails, which would be machined, or the tail. So we could machine the tail with a CNC, for example. They're the kits sections, which are quite interesting. We can therefore edit a series of sections for 3D. People who wants to make their wooden boards can make the kits of the different sections and all the machining kits, which will allow us to generate our board. We won't go too far here, but we have the possibility to do that too with this software. I'm going to deactivate the 3D CNC to go back to normal mode. And we're going to go, in the aspect, here at the bottom, we're going to go to the bottom pane. And there we're going to show a little detail. We were talking about kits. Here we can either show and the shape option, the board, or switch to woodkits, and show the different parts of board made in woodkit. We could explode this view to see the different components. So it's all these components here that we will find in the CNC kits. Here, where we will be able to make the codes, or else, we will be able to export them via the file menu. And therefore in the STL exports, we will see that we can export a lot of things. In particular the different sections, the bevels, and the boards that make this wooden board. We have seen the wood kits. We will now go all the way to the right here. Or they're the different ways of displaying the board. We can display it by points. These are small points whose size can be modified. We can display in wire, or in volume, of course. You can also, to precisely show the ribs are a bit like the bevel areas. In fact, this would be the areas of different thickness. When we draw our board and when we shape our board, we often think in terms of thickness. And our planing strokes actually follow bevel lines, so it would be a bit like these chamfer lines. We will show the sections, and we can show both at the same time to show a complete plank structure. We're going to go back to volume, and we can deactivate that. Here we are going to show the phases of shaping. So here we are in the finished phase, there we are in the end phase of shaping. Here we are at the third chamfer. We're going to put the top up. Second chamfer here, and first chamfer. This is the construction phases of our board, when we shape them in the traditional way. So we have the different phases. Here we cut the outline to the right thickness, and put the rockers flat underneath. So we have the different phases of shape, with the measurements and the dimensions, that can be used to prepare the work, at the workshop. So we will use it more or less depending on our way of working. So we can edit the cut planes of each zone. We will pass in wire, there it is useful, there we will see the sketch at phase 0, for example. Here we have the plan. We're going to go flat rocker here. In fact, we have our plans with the measurements at each section. So here it is not of much interest because it is almost the entire measurement. But when we go to the manufacture of the chamfers, we take dimensions on chamfers like this. It depends on your way of working. There are some who don't use that at all. But hey, there are some who also like to have precise dimensions to be able to make their bevels, in the traditional craftsman way of shaping. We could, of course, export all these plans. We can also go and find a particular section in a given place. I'm going to hide the 11 sections here, and show that here we can move around and come and make a detailed plan of all the chamfers that will have to be made in the 3 phases of construction of our board. The 3 phases of bevels. Now we will see in the aspect surfaces. When I go into the finished phase here, and I put in volume, well, we have a certain aspect on the outer surface, which can be more or less rough. I don't know if we can see the roughness here, or more or less bright. Here we have a lot of shine. More or less shine and more or less roughness until it becomes perfectly smooth. Here it is a mirror that reflects the room. That's the aspects we can give, so we have either draft aspect or finish aspect. We could change the color of the board and the image of the board. There we have a tutorial that speaks precisely of board's image, which is quite important because the image below often serves as a model. We will place an image below and we will go to the custom outline to work from the image below. It's in the custom outline tutorial. Here its effects and which can be interesting on the underside of the board. For example, so there we'll go into draft, we'll see better, and we'll get into the shaped phase. Here we can actually show color effects with a certain scale. Here we simply see the distance from the reference 0 of the rocker. So in fact we see here that we have a concave. The red areas are closer to the reference surface, and with a distance scale, with this color code. We can show it from above, and we can also see the same way, and a color code for the thicknesses. We can actually see the thicknesses of our board. It's quite nice because it gives us a vision of thickness by color code. Here is the board curve, so a color code for the board in XY there. Just in Y, and there just in X. You will see that it can be very interesting to handle these color codes with precision. This is how these color codes apply to the current image, more or less accentuated. No effect here. Let's also see the sectional views of the board. It's nice to see sections to make screenshots. So we're going to see several cutting modes. We're going to activate the view cut, that's it. So here we are going to put ourselves in right or left cut. We can modify the cutting angle, we can make cuts we want in all directions. It is there the skeleton cut, where we can modify the number of cutting elements to look at how our profile is drawn at different areas of our board. Let's look at the Shaper report. The Shaper report is a series of edits. Here, for example, we will be able to very quickly edit a plan. Here we have edited the plan with the different rail dimensions during the shape phase. Here we are really at the time of the cutting, therefore of the template of the outline with the notions of thickness, etc. So all that is stored each time we are going to make a request for documents in the Shaper report, which then allows to process and edit in PDF. A Shaper report that we will take to the workshop or show to our client. For example, we can show how the bottom form will be distributed. So we can make a Shaper report like that, assemble different elements, and give it as a project reference for a client who is interested in a type of board, and memorize the work that has been done upstream. Finally, there are lots of little editing tools in the Shaper report to really create a quality document. A basic report shaper, with the options checked here. For example, if we want all the plans or diagrams, the instructions, it would be for beginners, someone who wants to make a board himself, and who needs the basic instruction where to start, in what order, and what to do, and the basic measurements to make end plan. We're not going to put it either, it'll go faster like that. And here we're going to see how we make a report shaper. We just have to click on it, and so there it is, automated. The Shaper report is produced, and we are recording all the plans in a Shaper report. It takes about 10 seconds in real time, that's it. This Shaper report, therefore, is here. We could join pages together or simply export the PDF right away. There I will make an example of PDF export of the Shaper report, test report, saved. So there we edit in PDF our project and these different parameters, and we will be able to send it by email or print it. The PDF therefore, which shows the different elements of the board, which can therefore be used for a preliminary project with a given client, and also for the workshop to really have all the dimensions at hand when you need them. So much for the Shaper report. The performances of a board can be shown in a schematic form. For example, we are going to import a board which a scan already calculated. Here default evaluative. So I enter a board in my software. I drag a board from my library which therefore has a scan, the small pie chart. Then we will see at the level of the shape report, the options that we have in addition. Here, the software loads the board and its hydroscan. Okay, it's done. In the Shaper report, I ask for a dynamic report at 20 km per hour. The software edits the dynamic report. Here we have a diagram which represents different dynamic elements of the board, which give us ideas on its behavior and its characteristics. We see here how the radius of curvature evolves. So here at 20 km per hour, depending on the surface movement, on the right, at the front, at the back, or on the left, we see the radius of curvature in a color code. We also see the board's drag and its angle of attack, depending on the position of the surfer too. For example, here we have a drag of 70 Newton, about 7 kilos therefore, with a friction part of 4 kilos, and a planning part of 2.8 kilograms. And we see how it evolves according to our position on the board. We will also have here the angles of attack according to the position. We see that when we are at the very back here, we have 45 degrees of angle of attack. On the sides here, we are also in angles of attack a little strong. And we will say that everything in front, the angle of attack is minimum. On the wide point it is 7.3 degrees. So it's informations that, compared to other boards, can give us pretty accurate ideas of the dynamics of a board for a given surfer. Here it's for an 80 kilograms surfer. That would change of course, if the surfer doesn't have the same weight or if the board doesn't go the same speed. So here we have the dynamic report. This can really argue a choice of board, a choice of size, depending on a type of wave. The shape. This will be in the tutorials that will follow on the shape. And here we also have an fin selection tool, which is also detailed in other tutorial. So there I finished presenting the shape room of the Shaperwave Dynamics software.